an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering A Wizard Abroad, Lughnasadh, and the Plains of Tethra. In these chapters, our band of merry wizards goes to battle, and they suffer more losses than I think they anticipated. It's kind of rough. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Tristen for commissioning this episode, and for having some flexibility because I had to reschedule this. I want to do a shout out again to Anna, who did the breakdown of chapters for me in terms of what to read for each episode of this book. It was super helpful. I noticed that these two chapters were, for this section, the final section for this book is only 25 pages long. And the first chapter of the next book is 37. That would put me over, but I don't know what you guys want me to do. If you would rather that I just cover chapter 7 and then have that extra time to reflect on the rest of the book, or if you want me to start jump right into the next book with the next episode. So whomever has commissioned the episode for that's coming up next, and I can check on who that is, let me know what you prefer on that, because I have done the combo of episodes before with this series specifically, where I've started another book within the same episode. I find it to be a little bit of an odd thing to do, but if you guys think that's the way to go, I trust your opinion on that. Yama's the one who commissioned the next one. So Yama, let me know. But anyway, okay, so back to this. The first chapter, Lughnasadh, I have to confess, guys, these books keep on catching me a little bit flat-footed because I forget that they're as short as they are. So every time we start to jump into the main fucking crux of the matter, I'm taken aback by it because I didn't think that we were there yet. And I really feel like I should have learned my lesson by now, but I have not. So we start Lughnasadh, and Nita wakes up, and the forging of this sword has already begun and is done before the end of the episode. I don't know what I thought was going to have to happen here. I think low-key I expected this to require... I guess it does, now that I think about it. I was going to say, I thought it was going to require some type of sacrifice in order to complete the creation of the sword. But I was mid-sentence when I realized that Biddy sacrifices herself, her existence masquerading as a human being, in order to accomplish the creation of this weapon. And I guess that's what Kit and Nita were saying last chapter when I think it's actually Kit who says, I have a bad feeling. I thought that he was saying he had a feeling that this whole thing with creating the sword just wasn't going to work out. I thought he was saying that he didn't feel like their plan was going to go according to plan. And instead, the bad feeling was that this is going to require somebody to essentially give up their life. And it's a pretty brutal thing once it happens, because I thought this, so those of you who have been listening to the Avatar podcast that I've been doing with Owen as the fundraiser for our wedding, you know that there's I don't want to spoil too much, but there's an episode where somebody essentially turns into the moon, or turns into a part of a spirit of the moon. And they basically get carried off and their whole self is gone. I guess I thought once things went down, that's what would happen to Biddy, was that she would just disappear. But I failed to think through the whole way this book has been written so far to emphasize the difference between envelopes and actual spirits. And Biddy is living in an envelope that can't quite handle a full, like, God self, which is what she sort of is. And so she has had to, like, downgrade her abilities in order for this envelope to cope with her being in there. But it's not, once her spirit is taken out of there, it's, the envelope is a totally separate thing and it's not included in that package deal. And yeah, so I just, like, I really forgot, I guess, that was how things worked here, and that it wasn't going to be a neat and tidy sacrifice. Biddy's, basically, she passes out, and the body is left behind in a coma to eventually die like a regular person. And there is something really tragically sad about that, you know? I don't, like, it would have been bad enough if she had just disappeared, but it would have felt sort of noble and supernatural in a way that distances us from the sacrifice in itself. And I think that's really why I wanted it that way, is that it feels a little less painful and final. Because you can imagine, if the body's gone, that the whole Biddy that we know and love is still off somewhere being who she is or who she was to us. But if it's just her spirit, the body remaining is like a reminder that, like, we didn't necessarily know the real Biddy, that this wasn't who she was. And it makes it much more like a regular human death. And it turns this whole thing into a bit more of just a human sacrifice rather than, you know, this noble giving up of the spirit. It feels different. So it was rough. I just didn't expect that. And it was just sad, you know? So anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So this chapter opens with Biddy working on the sword. Nita is watching the work that she's doing and the way that she's, like, folding the metal and everything. And Kit is already there. He says that he couldn't sleep. He went home and, you know, laid there in bed and just couldn't. And so he came back, but his folks think that he's still in bed. Biddy kept hammering, not a simple single stroke, but a clang-tink, clang-tink, doubled with the rebound of the hammered ingot on the anvil, a sound like a heartbeat, but metallic. And Darreen winds up not participating in this battle, which I kind of thought she might. But as Johnny points out, he's worried that maybe they don't actually, like, win this battle and they're going to need an ace in the hole. And Darreen is going to be their backup plan in case everything goes really wrong. So actually, that's a really smart idea. I know I've said already how, like, I have this sort of false sense of security because there are adults in this story. And as an adult reading a book for kids, it's really hard for me to let go of the knowledge that these are kids. If I'm a kid reading this, the fact that there are adults here, I don't know if that would be comforting or if it would be frustrating. It might be both. But I'm definitely having a bit of, like, the Rashawn reading Harry Potter, asking where are the adults. Like, I'm glad that this book has some. And at the same time, I'm aware that, like, Nita and Kit are the ones with more power. So if something really dramatic and difficult needs to be pulled off at some point, they're going to be the ones called to the fore in order to take care of it. I'm just not used to seeing stories handle magic this way, where children are the ones that have more of it. I mean, the only time that you really see this kind of thing is when you're dealing with like something like being psychic and like seeing the dead. Then we have this thing where kids are like more connected and adults like lose their connection with that, or they don't understand. But in terms of like magic that's manifesting this way, we usually associate this with like skill that is acquired over time and developed the same way that we do most skills in our lives. And this being an innate like power within that just diminishes as they get older is a really different way of looking at it. And it still makes me really uncomfortable, to be honest. So Biddy is asking Johnny when they're going to ensoul this spear. And he says, I think we have to make our move tomorrow. May as well be. It's Lunisad, a good day. But you can't have the spells ready by then, Biddy said to him. You can't possibly. They're ready enough, Johnny replied. We can't wait for the poetry of them to be perfect. It's not the old days anymore, unfortunately. Brute force and the treasures are going to have to carry the day or nothing. When does the forging in the fierce spirit bit start? Nita asked. The re-ensoulment begins as soon as Biddy's done. We can't wait any longer. Fortunately, we don't have to do what the power that worked with her the first time did and actually call that spirit out of timelessness. It's here already, somewhere. All it needs is to be slipped into this body. And this is when they get a little bit of the like lore of this world about weapons having souls. And Johnny says that it was like super common once upon a time that you would pick up a sword and it would literally tell you its history. And he says verbally, not the way one would do it these days to a wizard sensitive to such things. That may be our problem today, that our weapons don't nag us anymore or tell us what they think of what we're doing with them. Just let themselves be used. But then they take their example from us, and bigger things than just people have lost their spirits over time. Planets, nations. And Nita's like, wait, nations? And he says, well, yeah, I mean, there's so much life in a nation. Of course they do. And then you must have seen how certain images, personifications keep recurring. All our countries have their own hauntings, good and bad. The bad ones get more press, unfortunately, but the good ones do keep resurfacing. I'm curious if that's going to come up a little bit more later on. Not necessarily even in this book, but just in general in these books. But that's, I think, a really interesting concept, like the spirit of a nation. And, you know, the United States, like, what would our spirit be? Because all I can think is that the spirit of our nation would have been something Native American. And we have just, like, beaten the hell out of that, like, the entire culture of all the nations of, like, native peoples that were here, that now I feel like the spirit of this nation has got to be something really awful that I don't want to know, you know? So Biddy says that there are 20,000 layers in the sword and that she thinks she's done, which is bonkers. And Johnny says that, you know, it has to be, it doesn't have to be an actually really great spear, because that's not really what they're going to be depending on for it to be a useful weapon. But at the same time, he recognizes that she's like taking pride in her work and wants it to be beautiful, and that's not a big deal. So they dunk the spear once she takes it out of the fire for its last hardening in the chalice. And this is kind of a dope moment that I did not see coming at all. The chalice doesn't get bigger. The spear doesn't get smaller. It's a very Mary Poppins reaching into her bag sort of situation where they dunk the spear in and it just goes in. And later on, they use the chalice to like heal some people as well, like dunk them in. And, you know, I assume that it has its limitations, but it's just really interesting to see it being used this way. So she pulls out the spear, and it's like almost a dark blue at this point. And she asks, how exactly are we going to do this? Well, all the dark powers' forays so far have been in our own world. We're just a beachhead. It's Time Heart that's really being attacked. It's true we have some limited success against it here because we're fighting on our own ground, but we can't hope to prosper if we stay merely on the defensive. We'll take it over into the Lone One's reality, into one more central. What happens there will affect what happens here. We'll try and move as fast as we can to finish the battle fast by forcing a fight with Baylor immediately. I have a few ideas about how we can do that, but unfortunately, the only way to test those ideas is to just do them, and if they don't work, then we're fucked. So let's see. Just looking at Biddy continuing to work on the blade. Around dawn, we'll finish the job, and then this afternoon we go to war. Wizards on active assignment will be helping. Some just along for the ride, but they live here and they feel involved. And when everybody's together, we go have us a fight. So this is when we find out what the deal is with the spear. Biddy asks Nita, do you know what I've forged here? And Nita looks at it and she says, your death. She can tell because of her magic what's going on here. And Biddy says, I gave up making, at least the kind of making that I used to do. Can you have any idea what it's like to ensoul your consciousness in a mountain range while it's still molten, and spend a century watching every crystal form, and to plan the long slides of strata, the way erosion wears at your work, even a scrape of glaciers, to be what you make, and to know what it'll become? You can't do that in one of these bodies. And I said I would do so no more, and that rather than ever do so again, I would give myself back to the One. And Nita is like, okay, so that's what's going on here. You made a promise, and you didn't know what you meant when you made the promise, and it sounds different now, but nevertheless, you made it, and there's no backing out of it. And Nita realizes, and she said, there's a moment here, I'm not entirely sure if I was reading this correctly or what. But Nita's wanting to be Biddy in this moment what other people were to her, and basically encourage her, but also emphasize the importance of keeping your word. Really remind her that this is sort of a non-negotiable, and your commitment is what everyone's depending on. And Nita says, any advice would sound hollow to someone in Biddy's position, but Nita thought of how it must have felt to the wizards who had advised her at one point or another. You can't very well let go of it at this point, Nita said. Your name in the speech is bound into the spelling we did yesterday. The name says who and what you are and for how long. Change the truth of that now, and the whole spell is ruined. You know that. No spear, no chance of ensouling it, no chance of saving Ireland. And she says, refuse this making, and you'll be part of the destruction of your first one. But you of all people should know what to do to keep this island healing, I would have thought. And Nita gets really embarrassed here when Biddy looks at her and says, sorry, never mind, forget I said anything, and runs out. I don't understand why she is so mortified here. Is she just saying is it just the tone that she took here? You of all people should know what to do to keep this island healing, I would have thought. Is it sort of her being what the fuck did you think was going to happen? Does she feel like she came across that way? I didn't read it that way, and I'm a little confused about why. Does she feel like maybe Biddy is just this huge power that is, and she's well, don't you know what you have to do? And feels like maybe she was being like impertinent. I just didn't really understand this moment. And I'm curious if you guys have like a read on this that explains why, because she literally, like I said, runs off because she's so embarrassed about the way that she said this. And I didn't get it. So she's talking to Kit and she's like looking, the sight of that cool, sharp metal on the anvil had given her something else to think about. Its image resounded against the image of Ronan in her mind, leaving her with a feeling bizarrely compounded of disaster and triumph. But the resonance was incomplete. It must be finished. It has to be fully forged. Otherwise. So what I think is happening here, based on what we see later, is that there's going to have to be a bonding between the piece of this like fighting sort of soul inside of Ronan and the spear itself. And that's what the fully forged thing means. So yeah, I don't know. Still one chapter to go, but it seems like when we see him later, something weird's going on with him. Like he's losing himself in some way. And it's a real freaky thing to watch, you know, like, I don't know. I hope that he doesn't die. I'm concerned that he's going to die. And I'll be real sad for Nita if that happens. Like, you know, that would suck. Anyway. So Kit says that this is different than last time. We don't have a lot of say in what's going on. And then says, I don't know if I like it. Nita knew what he meant. Maybe this is more what it's like for grown-ups, she said. I guess this is what it'll be like when we're older if we survive. You think we might not? I don't know. We've been in a lot of situations we thought might kill us or that looked bad for part of a continent, part of an ocean, sometimes part of a universe. But this time it just seems more bigger this time, even though it's smaller. You know what I mean? But among other things, Kit added, it means if we get killed, it's not our fault. The only thing I don't understand, I think we're missing somebody. Like who? I don't know, but there's something we're missing. And then they start talking about what happens if they die. Going to Time Heart is what they think happens. But she says that she's never really thought about it. And she never really expected it to happen. Like, this is the first time, Kit says, every other time that they've been in really bad trouble, he has had just an awful feeling in the pit of his stomach, this terrible fear. And then it worked out. But this time, he doesn't have that awful feeling. And he's wondering if that means anything. And Nita's like, I mean, even if we do die, is that terrible? I mean, we're going to be going down fighting. At least we're doing something useful. And he says that she sounds like Darine, which is a very good point. But it's a real moment for me of just being like, damn, I feel like when I was younger, and I still say this sometimes, I'm not exactly afraid of death. Death I find interesting. You know, I'm like, yeah, I want to see what happens. Like, I'm curious. I am afraid of, as I think most of us are, not having accomplished what I want beforehand. I think that's really what it is. For most of us, it's not usually the fear of what comes after. A lot of us, it's realizing that we like misused our time here. And I think about that a lot. You know, if I found out that I was going to be dead by the end of this year, what would I change about what I'm doing? Because the fact of the matter is, we don't have any idea when we're going to go. We can estimate based on our health. We can estimate based on the kind of jobs we have and the lifestyle that we lead. whether we are more or less likely to die of X, Y, and Z. But as far as like, you know, car accidents or freak accidents or, you know, an aneurysm that you don't know is like hiding somewhere in your system, you just never know how much time you actually have. And what would you think if you dropped dead next month about how you've been living? Would you be happy with it? Would you feel like you had really made the best effort at making your life better? Would you feel like you had really done your best at holding people in your life accountable for the like toxicity that they have inflicted on you? Do you feel like you've done the best to hold yourself accountable for the toxicity that you have inflicted on other people? Would you look back at the last few months, like as you're leaving your body, and be like, wow, I had so many opportunities to make it better, to do more that I didn't take, and I can't believe I didn't and now it's over and I don't have the chance and I can't believe I didn't do it. And that kind of thing is what haunts me. It's like, I like to think I'm making the most of it, but when you really get down to it, that means different things for different people. And I mean, what I think now versus what I would think when I left my body and look back might not match up at all. And so them talking about going to time heart and what happens after, that's not the sort of thing that ever, like what happens after death. I'm just in the way that they're talking about it. I'm very curious about what it's like. And I even wonder when I die and I find out, in quotes, what happens after, will that even be the answer, or does everybody experience a different thing? I don't know what it's like for other people. Even if I die and I get to like sort of see the experience, I don't know what other people's experiences are. Death is just such a weird, nebulous thing. And the more I think about it, the more I become determined to do more while I'm here, to make more of an effort, to stop waiting, to do things that I want to do. And of course, you know, there are going to be obstacles in our way that are very real. But I think we all know when those obstacles are genuine and when they're an excuse, when those obstacles are just something that we are afraid of versus something that's actually causing us to not be able to take action. They're going into battle. That's their decision here, facing down death. And that is a freaking... this is the fourth time now that they have been called to do this. It's pretty brutal. So finally, the two of them both fall asleep and they wind up waking up just as as the other wizards are ensouling the spear. And the way this is described, I think, is really cool. So they're gathered in a circle around the spear, and it says the blade of the spear, almost 3 feet long, had been socketed into the shaft and bound with more of the star steel. Very plain. Pale shaft, paler blade, with wizards all around it setting up the spell. And they start to speak in this way that is calling out to this power. And all four voices ended on a tone of command, and the silence fell. In the east, the sky was going gold, and low clouds were beginning to catch the fire of the sun that had not yet risen. The spear stood there in the cool light, still as a tree. And then it moved. It leaned ever so slightly eastward, leaned like a branch of a tree being blown that way in a wind. And it was beginning to make a sound as well. And then Nita realizes it's not making the sound. The sound is happening around it. And it wasn't actually an audible sound. It's something that she can like feel in her mind. And all of a sudden, this pressure begins to build. And it starts to push her and Kit back against the tree. All I could picture was like the effect of being in one of those like spinning rides at a carnival. And what was coming definitely meant well. Maybe a little too well for mortals to bear. It wanted all things healed, everything made well, no matter what pains it cost. Everything being put right, straightened, filled. Nita held onto the tree as she felt that down-pressing force trying to tamper with her, with the cells of her body, her mind. They resisted in their dumb way, and so did she, thinking, leave me the way I am, leave me alone, I know what you want, I know. And that was exactly it. It wasn't a pressure, it was a being. Not a thing, but a person. Not just a person, but a power coming down to answer the call with a frightful, violent strength. Because it wasn't chained by entropy and the other forces that work on matter. Not yet. So it goes into the spear. And I love this particular description. In the center of the circle, it says something, I'm trying to find the spot. Here it is. In the middle of the circle where the four wizards stood, something stood and looked back at them. It was shaped like a spear, but this fooled no one. They knew they were watched and considered gravely, cheerfully, by something that would kill any one or all of them to do its job, to find the darkness, pierce it, and be its end. I love that. Something looked at them. It appeared to be a spear, but they knew that that was not the case. The wood of the shaft was scorched black, but it was otherwise sound. Above it, the spearhead stood plain and cool and silvery, but there was something moving in the blade. The lines of layered metal that Biddy had hammered in, black once, now wavered and twisted, needle-thin lines of fire, white and yellow-white, swirling and writhing in the metal. It's awake. It worked. And Biddy, at this point, collapses. And Nita says what's wrong with her, but she knows what's wrong with her. They've had this conversation already. And Nita looks up to see Ronan standing there, staring at the spear. He was wearing an expression like that of someone who finds something that's lost, something he has been wanting for a long time, something without which he's not complete. It was a frightened look, and a frightening one. What unnerved Nita even more was the way she could feel the spear looking back at Ronan. The spear considered him to be just such a lost object, recovered after a long time, that which completes. Yikes. Nope, don't like that. So, the next chapter, The Plains of Tethra, begins at Castle Matrix with everybody getting ready for this battle. And there's a lot of sort of that nervous energy that happens before something goes down. That's pretty major and pretty serious. And everybody's trying to keep their spirits up. Everybody's trying to behave as if this is a good time and pretend that what's going to happen later isn't going to happen. And there is just this sort of like desperation in the way everybody's like having tea and chit-chatting. And it's just nerves, you know, everybody's really nervous. And Nita had seen Johnny carrying the spear and just says that he says that it burns if he holds it for even a little while. But he says like, it can't help that it does this. We brought it into being in order to do that exact thing. But I'm clearly not the one it wants holding it. And she says we could take turns carrying it. And I thought when he said there's someone else at once that he didn't know yet, but he does. He says, I think it's made his choice. He just has to stop fighting it. I think he will. And yeah, I'm very, very worried about Ronan is all I'm saying. So she goes up to Ronan and says, hey, Patty, "Hey, Miss Yank." But there was none of the good old abrasiveness in his voice now, nothing but soft fear. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I hear it calling me all the time now, not just calling me either. Him." And then comes this funny moment where Nita realizes that he's talking about that flicker of whatever is in Ronan. And she's like, "Oh, God, I was so confused. I'm sorry. I'm used to thinking of him as a her." Because when we dealt with this thing, and Ronan gets really angry at this suggestion, and Nita is just like, "Dude, you need to get over it. Gender, you think that these fucking powers give any shits like about that kind of thing? No, it does not matter." But he says, "I hear this other voice, not mine, that wants the spear. It's his from a long way back, Lou." And Nita realizes that he is getting like choked up and teary-eyed as he's saying it. And he asks, "Why me?" And she says that the knowledge makes it obvious that they are related, that he has some of the original's blood. You heard what the Queen said about the powers dipping in from outside of time and getting into relationships with people here for one reason or another. So he loved somebody when he was here physically once, maybe even as Lou himself. Does it matter? When he finished the other job he was on, the one sent him, or her, whatever, another one. Busy guy. But as soon as he could, he came hunting a suitable vessel, like the spear did. And Ronan says, "You knew him? What's he like?" And she is trying to come up with words to describe what Peach was like. Tough, cranky, kind, funny sometimes. Always very fierce, very strong, very certain. And Ronan kind of rebels against this whole idea. He says, "Why don't I get a say in this? I don't want certainty. I don't want answers. I don't even know if the questions are yet. Don't I get any time to figure this out for myself before Saint Bloody Michael the Archangel or whatever else he's been lately moves in upstairs in my head and starts rearranging the furniture?" And Nita's like, "I mean, look, you do have a choice. I think you know that you have a choice. If you wanted him out, genuinely wanted this piece of him out, you could kick him out. But you also know that we don't have anybody else that can cope with using this spear. So you're going to have to be okay with leaving us high and dry if you decide to kick him out." And Ronan says, "If I once let him run me, he's in to stay." Which is interesting. I don't know if he really knows that, really, or if that's his guess. But that changes things, because when she said this initially, I was kind of like, okay, yeah, you kick him out once you're done. You use the spear and you don't need to have him present in your mind anymore. And then you decide you don't want him there. Evidently, that's not going to be how it works, which is just, that sucks, man. I don't know what to say. Maybe it will manifest differently once this is done and the relationship that Ronan has with this fragment will change. But I don't know. So Ronan brings up the other night when they kissed, just says the other night, and then he walks away. And he doesn't actually finish saying anything. What is there to say at this point? Like, he has so much bigger fish to fry. I think that the idea of talking about that just feels, it's not the right time, So by 3:00, there were some 300 wizards there. By 8, perhaps another 200 had arrived from all over. And they've all been told to come armed. So they bring all this stuff, and it's really odd. Some people have swords. Some people have like rods and wands and staves, the things that you imagine wizards using. Other people have like rakes and shovels. And then one dude has an egg beater, which I just have no idea. I would really have liked to see that in action. And I love the kitten turning up, Tula. It's a great glory of weapons that is in it, borne by the fair-haired and the beautiful. All mannerly they are as young girls, but with the hearts of boon comrades and the courage of lions. Whoever has been with them and parts from them, he is 9 days fretting for their company. Oh my God, Tula. So this cat bard winds up climbing into Nita's backpack and coming into the battle with her, which, I just never expected that to be how this went down at all. If anything, I didn't think Tula was going to be at the battle, period. But I thought if she was, she'd just be like on the outskirts watching. It turns out she's going to be in this backpack, maybe occasionally laying into people with teeth. I would make poems and satires so that they would curl up and die of shame, and welts would rise all over them if they did not die straight away, so that they would wish they were dead from that out. Oh my God. So this is when Nita finds out that Biddy is essentially in a coma and that the body is going to probably die pretty soon. And they have their big meeting in the Great Hall, and Johnny says, "We're about to go. I can't tell you about what to expect, except that we're going into what is for us the country of myth. So expect to see even more of the old stories coming true. The legends that have been invading our world over the past few weeks, they'll be real. Just don't forget that we are myths to them. In the plains of Tethra, we are what they tell stories about around the fire at night. So don't be afraid to use your wizardry. There aren't any overlays where we're going, or none that matter to what we're doing. At some point, we'll be faced by an army. I don't know what it's going to look like. We've seen all kinds of Fomori over here in the past couple of weeks. I don't know how they'll appear on their own ground. So anything can look like anything, and you should feel for their essence and act accordingly. Don't forget that the people of the hills and the other non-physicals who live over on that side are as much oppressed by the Fomori and Baelor as we have been in our world. Maybe more so. And whether they actively come to our assistance or not, they are on our side. Be careful not to mistake them for Fomori and harm them. Don't get carried away in the excitement of things, and remember your oaths. No destruction that's not necessary." One last thing. Most of us have never been in an intervention this crucial or this dangerous. The odds against us are extremely high. It is a certainty that some of us will not come back. Please be careful. Please, please, with your choice. One thing a wizard cannot patch, as you know, is any situation in which his or her own death occurs. So any of you with dependents or responsibilities that you think may supersede this one, please think about whether you want to cross over. We'll need guardians on this side too, to keep an eye on the world gate in case the Fomori try to stage a breakthrough behind the main group. Bravery is valuable, but irresponsibility will doom us. Later, if not now. So think. Those of you who need to excuse yourselves, just remain here when we pass through. Meanwhile, let's open the gate. So I really liked this. There's no like, hey guys, if you don't join with us, you're dooming your world, and way to go, cowards. It's very much like, we are going to need people in a variety of capacities here. If you don't feel comfortable because you have people who depend on you, and that's a very real thing, you should take that seriously, just as seriously as this. And I really appreciated that. So they go out and it says Nita and Kit went along. Nita was curious to see what would happen. Gatings were an air sorcery. The business of parting the fabric of space-time was attached to the element of air, with all those other subtle forces that a wizard could feel but not see. So she watches her aunt, who is the one who opens the way. And she really doesn't have to do that much. She uses the Sword of Lu and just says, "Let the way be opened." And the barriers were worn so thin that a wind springs up And then this like opening parts. It looked like a rainstorm coming, the way she had seen them slide along the hills. It was the darker kind of light, wispy, trailing from sky to earth, sweeping down on them. Behind it, the landscape darkened, silvered, muted, as if someone had turned down the brightness control on a TV. Everything went vague and soft. The effect swept toward them rapidly, swallowing the edges of the horizon, and then passed over them, roiling like a thundercloud. The wind dropped off as the effect passed. So that's pretty cool. What a, wild way to have this open. And Johnny tells them to head east toward the sea and toward the dawn, always towards the east. Don't let yourselves get turned around. And Nita is a little surprised at the fact that Castle Matrix is still itself. She thought that there were going to be some other type of building that replaced it, or that it would just be gone. But it's different. The cars and the parking lot are gone. And she says that it was a little grimmer looking, but otherwise it looks like itself. And let's see. Auntie Anne was off to one side, carrying Fraggle Rock. Some ways ahead of her, Doris Smith walked with a cup still in its pillowcase. And Doris says that she's carrying it that way because they're borrowing it from the museum. And if it gets scratched, they'll ask questions about what could have happened to it when it was like locked up safely in this case, Ahead of them, she saw Ronan stalking along in his black jeans and boots and leathers, carrying what looked like a pole wrapped in canvas, except that she knew perfectly well that it wasn't a pole. She got the clear feeling that from inside the wrappings, something was looking at her hard. "I think he'll stop fighting it," Johnny had said. "Come on," she said to Kit. They made their way over to Ronan. "You okay?" Ronan looked at her. What a daft question. Why shouldn't I be okay? Nita almost didn't like to say the spear's name in front of it. "Your friend there. Don't you just have trouble carrying it?" Johnny was having a real hard time. "No. Should I? Is the wrapping coming undone?" "Oh, no. Never mind." She particularly noticed a slightly glazed look in Ronan's eyes, as if he was seeing something other than what the rest of them were seeing. It was an abstracted expression. Could the spear make it easier for the person it wanted to carry by dulling or numbing that person's own sense of it? Or was it something else? Again, guys, I said it already, but I'll say it again. I don't like it. So, here comes the Morrigan. It is appearing in the shape of a hoodie crow. I have never seen a hoodie crow. I'm actually going to look up what they look like right now as we speak. Okay, so it's got a kind of a gray and black thing going on. It's a combo. So it looks like it's wearing basically a sleeveless hoodie. That's kind of funny, the way it's colored. And the bird says all of these like things I see of fierce, tempestuous fight, destruction of life, shattering of shields, whetting of sword edge, yada, yada, yada. Johnny, like, as intimidating as this fucking thing is, does not really seem bothered by it or impressed by it at all. The rumbling of chariots, indeed. You've been picking up roadkills by the dual carriageway again, great queen. Oh my God, Johnny. Buddy, a little respect. Come on. And when Nina asks Ronan who it was, he says it's just the Morrigan, as if that's not like a huge being that would be much like using the word just. Yeah, that seems really inappropriate to me, but I don't know. Maybe she's just around all the time. And when Nita looks at him, she can see that there's that look again of like being sort of dazzled and not there, but there's also like memory, and she thinks that the piece of whatever that's inside him knows the Morrigan personally. And he says she can be good too. She's one of the powers that can go either way without warning. So they keep walking, and all of a sudden they get set upon by the first wave of Fomori. They kind of come out of nowhere. Nita and Kit, being well off to one side and their view not blocked, had a chance to look the situation over before it got totally incomprehensible. There were a lot of the same kind of draw that they had seen in Bray. Some of them were riding black creatures which were horse-like but fanged, like tigers. There were strange headless humanoid creatures with eyes in their chests, and scaly worm-like beasts that flowed along the ground but were 100 times the size of any snake. That much Nita could make out before the front line of the Fomori smashed in among the leading wizards and the battle broke out. The wizards counterattacked. Spells were shouted, weapons alive with wizard light struck, and the fight started to be a very uneven one, so much so that Nita was surprised by it. The draws at least had seemed much stronger in her own world, but here they went down quickly under the onslaught. Eventually, Kit's like, that had to be a feint. There's no way that's the best they got. And it seems like they overtook them very easily, but then they look over and they realize that somebody has died already. Like, it just seems way too soon for them to have already lost someone. And there is a description here that I thought was really interesting, and I feel like this has to come from like having seen it herself. I would be very curious to know if this author has like seen crime scenes or something, but she says, there were several drows lying in pieces by the body, but it was no consolation seeing that they were spattered with that shade of red so bright, even in this dim light, that it looked fake. Nita shuddered, for her experience had shown her that the fake look was a sure sign it was the real thing. Kind of weird, right? You know, I'm curious about that. Like, how I don't look at crime scene photos and stuff. I am too sensitive. I would not be able to handle it. So I have no idea. But that, you know, feels like something that you say when you fucking know. So 2 other wizards had gone over to check the young woman. Now one of them came back to Johnny, shaking his head. They'll have to be left there for now, Johnny said. We'll see to them later. We can't wait. So they keep on heading down. And it's starting to get darker, and they need to like make lights to Bob ahead of them. And she's asking Kit what he thinks they can do. She says, "Is there anything specific to hit these things with?" He says, "The beam me up spell. If you leave the locus specification for the far end of the spell blank, or if you specify somewhere in deep space." And she kind of goes, ugh, because, you know, God knows what happened to it out there. But he says, better them than me. Cold-blooded, Kit, but I'm here for it. I'm here for it. So the Fomori attack again, hitting the group of wizards in the middle to try and split them up. And Nita, it says, she had a lot of difficulty remembering the fight later, but the one thing she did remember to her horror was that she enjoyed it a great deal. And this is the kind of thing that I'm worried about with myself, is that I worry that I would just have a little bit too much of a taste for violence if I ever got into it. There's just a part of me that knows in there somewhere is a part probably would have the same reaction. The other thing she remembered vividly was the screaming. At time, it didn't bother her particularly. Later on, she found herself wondering whether too much television had dulled her reactions to the pain of others. Everything seemed remote, like something in the crowd scene from a movie. And she's using a bunch of spells that like explode these drows. She's got a shield up, and the drows, when they explode, there's like burning hot ichor that hits the shield, and some of it makes its way through and burns through to her skin a little bit. And the Fomori came at the wizards to savage them, sometimes missing, sometimes succeeding. That was when it began to come home to Nita that this was not a movie. One wizard went by her staggering and white-faced with shock and blood loss, one arm so badly torn that it seemed to be just barely hanging on from his shoulder by a string. Another wizard, a young woman in jeans and a sweatshirt, hurried to help carrying him away. It was not a movie. People were getting killed here. There came another lull after a long while. There seemed to be no more drows, no more horse things. A lot of wizards had been hurt and were sitting or lying down on the ground while others tended to them. After a while, Kit found her. He had turned his ankle somehow while he was fighting, and she is able to heal him, but she's really astonished at the fact that it takes a ton of energy to heal him versus what it would normally take at home. And this is when it's sort of hitting them that their magic is taking, it works better here, but it takes more energy as well. So they're having to pay a price for all of this. And he says, we'd better get this over with fast. In a few hours, we won't be worth much. Which, yeah, that feels unfair. You know, I mean, Jesus, they already are at a disadvantage. I feel like, I don't know that, but I just assume so. So they find, Aunt Annie, and she's with Doris. The blue-green fire of the cup gave away their location. Doris was working with one of the more seriously wounded people. They were easing a young woman with a torn leg down into the cup. And, when she gets lifted out, the leg was whole. Doris was looking wobbly. I'll not be doing much more of this. The cup's able enough to do it, but it's just a tool. It can't work by itself without someone to tell it what to do. And not I nor anyone else will be able to keep doing this again and again. Not here. Not today. So I liked that because if the cup just heals people and that's it, it's too easy, right? There has to be a catch. And I appreciate this catch being related to the magic causing or draining more energy from them than usual. And Annie Annie seems fine. She asks Nita if she's okay, but she's not even really looking at her. She's just so preoccupied with everything that's going on around them. And they look down at this wall of blackness so opaque as to seem nearly solid. Just looking at it gave Nita a bad feeling. Something's on the other side of that, Kit said, and it's watching us. Her aunt looked at Nita regretfully. I'm beginning to wish I left you home. You couldn't have. I would have found a way to come along, and you know it. And she says, don't do anything stupid, and Nita just starts to say, I was going to ask you, when Johnny comes up and asks if he can have a word. And Nita brushes herself off, and there's a moment of them being kind of like embarrassed at the fact that they were showing each other affection. I don't know if she was about to ask, but I mean, I feel like it depends on the tone. Because her aunt says, don't do anything stupid. And Nita says, listen, I was just about to ask you about that. Or she says, listen, I was just about to ask you about that. Like, are you doing anything stupid? That could be read a couple ways, and I'm not sure which one. I think it's supposed to be the second one where it's a bit of a joke, but I couldn't quite tell. And at this place, Johnny comes up and is like, okay, dude, look. And he's crying. His voice is very steady and he's calm looking. But he's like, too many people have died. We can't keep on like this. We have to use our aces early. And her aunt is like, but if we use them early, what happens if if they come back at us later and we're all used up? And he says, that's precisely the problem. The sword, the cup, and stone were never much use against Baelor the last time. Second, if we're all killed or driven off, or if they delay us past the point where our wizardry still works, all of this would have been for nothing. And she says, I don't know if I can do this. There's a soul in this, and an intelligence and a will, one much older and stronger than mine, one that considers me mainly a form of transportation. once I actually start to use it, which is going to be the tool and which the user, I don't know how much of me is going to be left afterwards. Even now, I can feel it pushing at my mind all the time. I don't know if you get the same sense of your rapport with a stone, but what about fire? I have some experience. I have ability to resist, but what's going to come of that poor child? What happens when the power that comes with the spirit puts forth its full force? And he's like, girl, I know that you don't want that to happen for his sake, but we have to hope that fucking happens because that's the only way we're going to win this thing. And if you can't do your part, I have to find somebody else. But you have the connection with this thing already. It's the best for all of us if you are the one who does this. To which she's finally like, okay, you're right. Yeah, I'll do it. And this moment is like Kit and Nita both thinking about like what'll happen to Ronan. And they have this mind connection that they don't normally have where they can hear each other's thoughts that used to happen by accident when they first became wizards, but they've been able to avoid most of the time since growing more experienced. And it's happening automatically now in a way that Nita finds kind of unnerving. And so then comes another attack. A chorus of voices uncertain, then a threatening long howl of rage. The wind rose and rose, bending the trees down before it, whipping leaves and dirt through the air so that it became hard to see. And the two fronts of Fomori that had struck them from either side were staggering back and away, farther down the slope, blown that way, forced by the raging wind that blew them over and over. And at this point, the fucking people of the hills, the Shi, come out on horseback and they are pissed off. And what it turns out is that later on they're talking and they're like, yeah, we feel like our world is coming to an end and we may as well get involved now because there is some shit going down. But it is like there are so many of them that it's described as being like attempting to count raindrops in a downpour. At the sight of them, a great shriek of despair and terror went up from the Fomori. The Shi cried out in answer, a cry of such pure delighted rage that Nita shuddered at the sound of it, and the slew run hit the great crowd of Fomori from the south. So that's pretty dope. This this is what we needed. We needed some kind of cavalry to come in, and lo and behold, here they literally are. We were called by our own element, the Queen said, looking down at Nita's aunt and Fraggle Rock. Besides, it's been too long since I went a-foraying, and since our world seems like enough to die here, this is as good a time to ride out again as any. We have not done badly, but I think we may not be able to do much more. All magics are diminishing in the face of our enemies, and she uses a word here that I cannot pronounce, and I feel the weariness in my bones. Do you feel it? And Johnny says, yes, but nevertheless, we will press on. And that is the end of the chapter. So there's one chapter to go. Mordecai's here too. Was Diane Duane a forensic nurse? Oh, maybe that's what the blood thing was. Interesting. If you guys missed the beginning, I was saying that there's one more chapter and I'll leave it up to whomever. It was Yama, I think, who commissioned the next episode. Whether they want me to include the first chapter of the next book in next week's episode, or not next week, but the next episode. I don't think it's next week. But if you are interested in chiming in on what you think would be best, Yama might be interested in hearing other people's assessments. And, All right, guys. Well, I'm going to wrap. Thank you again so much for coming, hanging out with me, listening. And thank you again to, Tristen, I believe it was this time, for commissioning this episode. And I will be seeing you all again soon with a new one. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.